I hope that you've enjoyed the discussion so far. For those of you who may have joined recently, my name is Bijan Ahmadi. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy. It is my honor and absolute pleasure to introduce Chris Backemeyer from the U.S. State Department. Chris Backemeyer currently serves as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Assistance, Coordination, and Regional and Multilateral Affairs in the State Department's Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs, where he oversees cross-cutting regional issues, regional policy issues, and coordinates over $7 billion in foreign assistance for the Middle East and North Africa. Previously, Mr. Backemeyer served as Special Advisor to Vice President Harris on national security and foreign policy issues related to the Middle East, international economics, and climate change. In the State Department, he also served in various roles, including the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Press and Public Diplomacy and Assistance Coordination in the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Iranian Affairs, and Deputy Coordinator for Sanctions Policy. From 2012 to 2014, Chris also served as the Director for Iran on the National Security Council staff at the White House, where he was responsible for advising the President, National Security Advisor, and other White House officials on strategic priorities for Iran. So we have someone from the U.S. State Department with extensive experience and deep knowledge to talk to us about U.S. priorities in the region, especially President Biden's approach and policies in the Middle East. To start the session, I invite Chris to deliver his opening remarks, and then we'll sit together here and have a conversation and I'll ask him some questions. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Chris Backemeyer.
Hello, thank you everyone. Thank you, Bijan, for that introduction. Good afternoon, colleagues and distinguished officials. Thank you in particular to the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy for inviting me here today to be able to share the United States perspective on this very important region and its ever-changing dynamics. Before I got started, though, I did want to start by reiterating our condolences for the people of Libya and Morocco and the recent earthquake and floods there. We are deeply saddened by these tragic events, and we stand with the people of Libya and Morocco and continue to prioritize support for humanitarian efforts as they rebuild and recover. So I wanted to start with that. The United States has a long and productive relationship with the Middle East and North Africa. And even as we seek to address geopolitical tensions in other parts of the world, we remain deeply invested and engaged in the region. We see regional integration, including normalization with Israel, and multilateral initiatives like the Negev Forum, I2U2, and the recently announced India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, as signs that our affirmative agenda, one that leads with diplomacy, is bearing fruit. Regional initiatives have great promise. They build resilience and are increasingly necessary to meet the challenges posed by climate change, diseases, and other transnational challenges that will define our shared future. That's why the administration's approach to the region has focused on de-escalating conflicts and encouraging regional integration, incentivizing stability and connectivity between its countries. Now, you're all intimately familiar with the fact that the Middle East is one of the least integrated regions in the world. The World Bank estimates that trade between the Middle East and North African countries is 3 times more expensive and takes 4 times longer than average high-income countries. Only 2% of the electricity produced in the region is traded between countries, and there's no inclusive forum to coordinate transboundary issues. The consequences of this are clear. In a region desperately in need of growth and jobs for a surging youth population, there's untapped potential that can generate the prosperity needed to underpin regional growth and prosperity. While it takes time to reshape the structural economic forces hindering integration, we can immediately address the political overlay that has prevented countries from opening up to each other and working on shared prosperity. Economic engagement and normalization with Israel is one important piece. With a dynamic economy driven by innovation, cutting-edge technology, and entrepreneurial problem-solving, further normalization with Israel can capitalize trade growth and development. And that's why we've been so active in advancing the Abraham Accords. We launched the Negev Forum, promoting the I2U2, which is our partnership with India, the UAE, Israel, and the United States. And we're looking for as many ways as we can to bring countries together and to address the shared challenges of the future. We're building on these initiatives to look further afield and use these new openings to launch food corridors, green transportation initiatives, clean energy and water projects, and cleaner electricity modernization. The India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor that the President announced just 2 weeks ago at the G20 is only the most recent example. And we're seeing progress. Since the Accords, Israel's bilateral trade with Bahrain and the UAE has increased. Direct flights have led to more tourism. We're seeing similar trends in Morocco, where thousands of new visitors are forging people-to-people and business ties. And we're seeking to support regional integration in other ways as well. We're working with the Gulf Cooperation Council to develop a regional approach to address security challenges, both within the Gulf and beyond, and advance a more stable, secure, prosperous, and integrated Middle East. We're encouraging Iraq's integration into the region, such as the electrical grid connections with the GCC and with Jordan, which lessens dependence on Iran and enhances Iraq's security and stability. Investment and infrastructure are at the top of the administration's list of priorities, and with this coordinated effort, things can continue moving in the right direction. Better integration will help the countries of the region respond to the many challenges it faces. Take climate change, for example. The MENA region is one of the most vulnerable in the world to rising temperatures and increasing water and food insecurity that will likely result from a changing climate. So it's fitting that the UN Climate Conference was held in Egypt last year and will be in the region again this year in the UAE, where countries will take stock of progress to keep global temperatures in check. Through close cooperation, MENA countries, though, can not only adapt to the changing climate, they can lead in a transition to a green economic future. We're already seeing this with countries like the UAE, Israel, and Jordan working together on Project Prosperity, a landmark deal that will provide solar energy produced in Israel, or solar energy produced in Jordan, in exchange for desalinated water produced in Israel. Partnerships like these have enormous potential in the fight against climate change. Now, while we focus on deepening and building upon the Abraham Accords and normalization agreements, we're also cognizant that it is no substitute for a negotiated settlement between Israelis and Palestinians. As Secretary Blinken has said, we all must build on these relationships and growing normalization to make tangible improvements in the lives of Palestinians and to make progress toward the long-standing goal of advancing a negotiated peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Palestinians and Israelis deserve equal measures of freedom, security, opportunity, and dignity. A two-state solution is the best way to ensure Israel's future as a Jewish democratic state, living in peace alongside a viable, sovereign, and democratic Palestinian state. We also remain committed to gender equality as a cornerstone of our foreign policy. Sustainable regional growth and prosperity requires inclusion of women and marginalized communities to best tackle economic challenges that the region will face over the next few decades. As Secretary Blinken has said, advancing women's economic security isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart and necessary thing to do. And as the only country to adopt a comprehensive law on women, peace, and security, we know the importance of ensuring women and girls' inclusion in all peace and security processes. Region-wide, we are moving away from a military-focused solutions to a focus on more affirmative, diplomatic responses. Our diplomacy will take the lead to build coalitions that stabilize regional conflicts and reduce regional tensions. For example, the Biden administration is fully committed to the United Nations and its efforts in support of peace. We support UN-facilitated peace processes in Yemen, Syria, Libya, and Western Sahara. Our efforts in Yemen helped lead to a truce last year, the key elements of which continue to hold despite its formal expiration. While negotiations continue on a durable ceasefire and the situation is fragile, the truce continues to provide Yemen with the longest period of calm since the war began more than 8 years ago. The United States strongly supports an inclusive Yemeni political process under UN auspices as the only means to bring an end to the conflict. In Syria, our engagement is vital to continue promoting accountability for the ongoing atrocities committed by all parties to the conflict, particularly the Assad regime. We will also continue to call for a nationwide ceasefire unhindered humanitarian access to all Syrians in need, the humane release of those arbitrarily detained, and clarification of the whereabouts and the fates of those who remain missing. We're focused on our efforts to defeat ISIS in partnership with local forces in northeast Syria, including stabilization assistance and diplomatic engagement, encouraging countries to repatriate their foreign terrorist fighters and other nationals remaining in the region. In Libya, our regional partnerships have played a central role in helping to secure a ceasefire that has now held for over 2 years. Maintaining international support for the UN-facilitated political process is crucial in realizing the Libyan people's demand to choose their leaders through free and fair elections. Now this brings us to Iran, where we see the Iranian government sowing instability across the region, and as the world has seen, forcefully suppressing the rights of the Iranian people at the same time. Together with partners, we're moving urgently through unilateral actions, multilateral measures, and UN mechanisms to hold Iran accountable for employing violence against its own population, particularly women and girls. Iran continues to exploit regional conflict and weak societies. The sustainable way to counter Iran's enduring threat is to strengthen our partners by building institutions, rule of law, inclusive political participation, and human rights. This closes off the space in the grievance politics that Iran and others exploit to sow divisions and cultivate terrorist proxies. We are also committed to ensuring that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon, and we continue to believe diplomacy is the best way to address Iran's nuclear program in a sustainable and effective way. But Iran must first take de-escalatory steps if it wants to reduce tensions and create space for diplomacy. We also know that the Middle East and North Africa are a critical venue for strategic competition. When we talk about infrastructure, connectivity, diplomacy, we must now contend with competition from Russia and China. We've already seen the disastrous results of Russia's actions in Syria, the deleterious effects of Russian-sponsored Wagner forces in Libya, and we've seen the extreme inflation and increase in food insecurity caused by Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we moved quickly to mobilize support, and some of our partners in the region have provided support as well. We've also worked hard to help the MENA region address the food security challenges caused by this war, providing over $2 billion in food security support to the region. We've, of course, also seen China increase its presence in the region as well. Globally, we see the PRC as the only country with the intent to reshape the international order and increasingly the capacity to do so. In the region, we're intent on building and maintaining our close historical partnerships. Our approach is to invest at home, along with our close partners, like Canada, and compete with the PRC to defend our interests and to build our vision for the future. To be clear, we aren't asking countries to choose. We understand that all can and should have a relationship with the PRC, just like we do. We're offering a choice to join the United States in building regional and multilateral solutions geared at stability, security, strong infrastructure, and innovative technology. The United States has a long history of partnership in the Middle East, and we have a comparative advantage in building coalitions, partnerships, and integrating defense networks. But we can't take this advantage for granted, and we must continue to strengthen our relationships and present a compelling alternative to our partners. Secretary Blinken said it best when he outlined his vision of diplomacy earlier this month. We're leading with diplomacy in this new era, humble about the scale and scope of our challenges at home and abroad, but confident about the resonance of our affirmative vision, our enduring and unique capacity to do big, hard things and build broad, inclusive, and effective coalitions. And most of all, we are confident in the power and purpose of American diplomacy. The United States will continue to work with our partners in the region and beyond to implement this vision. Thank you for your indulgence, and I'll look forward to further discussion.
For individuals in the back, if there are more seats in front, so if you're not comfortable there, please feel free to join us on tables that are available here. That would be perhaps more comfortable for you, but yeah. So thank you, Chris. Thank you for this comprehensive overview of U.S. priorities in the region. Now allow me to ask some follow-up questions on some of the points that you mentioned. We have heard positive signals from Prime Minister Netanyahu and Crown Prince bin Salman about potential normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. How optimistic the administration is about getting this deal to the finish line?
Thanks, Bijan. I anticipated this would probably be a question on people's minds. To cut to the chase, I don't have news to break on this here today. Obviously, as you can tell from my remarks, we're deeply invested in the idea of further regional integration, further normalization between Israel and Arab states, and would be very supportive of this. Something like Saudi-Israeli normalization could be transformational for the region and build on a lot of the things we're trying to do. Certainly, people or all the people involved are working hard towards that end, and we're obviously would be hopeful. We know too the Saudis are also have made clear that there would need to be some sort of resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian issues as part of this, and so we'll have to see how all of that plays out. Unfortunately, I don't have anything with respect to a timeline or wouldn't want to handicap the potential for that to come to conclusion anytime soon.
I understand. So I'm going to follow up on this, though, and try to see if I can get more information about the priorities of the Biden administration on this deal. You mentioned Saudi's kind of demand, request for some sort of concessions on the Palestinian issue from the Israeli side. Does the administration, the Biden administration, also see this normalization between Saudi and Israel as perhaps an opportunity to advance the Palestinian issue? Or do you think that it needs to perhaps come after and this normalization deal, not as part of the deal, but as sort of future steps that can happen after the deal, the Palestinian issue should be addressed?
So like the Saudis have said, it is certainly the case that the United States, in our conversations with the Israelis, have also reiterated that if something like this is to take place, that it should include steps with respect to the Palestinians and the Israelis in that situation. Whether it would be before, after, I wouldn't want to speculate on what the structure or the framework of that might be. I don't know that there's anything so concrete. But certainly, we do agree, as do the Saudis, that is something that would be important to be included.
Okay. Recently, U.S. and Iran did a prisoner swap in which 5 Americans got released after being unjustly imprisoned in Iran for years. In return, U.S. released around $6 billion of Iranian assets. There has also been talks of an informal understanding, if we want to call it, between Washington and Tehran to de-escalate tensions over Iran's nuclear program. What's next for the administration when it comes to Iran? Has this recent prisoner swap deal, if we want to call it that, for example, opened some space for resumption of negotiations on JCPOA, or should we consider that chapter JCPOA ended and look for other measures that will be taken towards Iran?
So first, I just want to say we very much welcome the release of the 5 Americans that were unjustly detained in Iran. Unfortunately, that sort of detention, politically motivated detention, has become all too common in Iran, and we were relieved to be able to secure their release. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't necessarily indicate that Iran has taken a different direction in its overall policies to the region. It still continues to repress its own population, still continues to sow discord around the region. And we still obviously continue to have significant concerns about its nuclear program. There's been a lot of speculation that a new nuclear deal must be in the offing if this is the case, and I don't believe that it is. Unfortunately, I think at this point, it's really in Iran's court to sort of to take some de-escalatory steps, as I mentioned in my remarks, and to really open the space for diplomacy while we continue to have human rights abuses, support for Russia and Ukraine. All of these things certainly make that more difficult. As I mentioned, the administration is obviously committed to preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon and committed to diplomacy. But there need to be two sides to that to make progress. Given what you said, Chris, how do you respond to critics who say that by giving
the Iranian regime billions of dollars. It's their own assets, but still providing them that or releasing that funds. When they're closer than ever to nuclear weapons, when they continue with their regional activities, their brutal crackdown on their own people, what's your sort of reaction to critiques that say this release of their funds will embolden the regime instead of containing them?
Certainly. Well, there's certainly been a lot of criticism and some assertion that these were somehow U.S. taxpayer funds or something, which they were not. I think a few things that are important to note, in particular, that these funds are to be utilized for humanitarian purposes, food, non-sanctioned trade of the sort, and overseen through a financial institution in Qatar. However, that doesn't change the fact that we still have a very strong posture when it comes to Iran. We continue to have aggressive sanctions in place. We continue to use venues like the United Nations, and we continue to work closely with our partners in the region to strengthen our posture, to push back on all of these very deeply concerning activities that the Iranians are engaged in the region. So, as we do with all American citizens, we do whatever we can to try to bring them home safely, especially when they've been wrongfully detained, and that was the case with this particular deal.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about China in the Middle East. China is now the top trading partner for many of the countries in the region, including several traditional U.S. partners. Through their BRI initiative, they're investing in, I think, 15 or 17 countries in the region. They brokered the deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran as well, and are strengthening their ties with GCC countries. Does Washington see China's increasing presence in the Middle East as a threat? And part of this is strategic competition ongoing with Beijing, between Washington and Beijing. Or do you actually see that there are perhaps areas of potential cooperation between Washington and Beijing in the region?
So as I mentioned in my remarks, our fundamental point is that we've not asked any of our partners to choose between China or the United States. It would be silly to do so when we have such an extensive economic and commercial relationship of our own. And we recognize that all of our partners are going to have extensive commercial relationships with China as a major economic power. We certainly do see the need, as a result of China's expanded influence, to make sure that we're rebuilding our relationships with our partners in the region. As I said, we have a long historical ties. You mentioned the increased economic activity by China, but if you actually look at the statistics, U.S. investment in the region is still far higher than that by the PRC. U.S. foreign assistance provided to the region is actually higher than China's U.S. foreign assistance globally. And so we've demonstrated a long-standing commitment to the region, but in the spirit of, what have you done for me lately, we need to continue to reiterate that and show our partners that we're there. And so that is something we're doing. We have also expressed concerns about things that concern us about Chinese activities. So, for example, in certain technologies, telecommunications technologies, we've expressed concerns when we believe that there are threats to privacy for people in the region, threats to sovereignty over the control of their own data for countries in the region. And also, importantly, threats that might impede on the United States. For example, if we have a significant relationship, security relationship with a country, we want to make sure that any sort of technologies that might be controlled by the PRC can't implicate our own posture. So we've expressed those concerns. We've had good discussions with countries in the region, and I think we're making good progress.
You mentioned in your opening remarks the recently announced India, Middle East, Europe corridor. Many experts assess that this idea, this corridor, this initiative is being proposed as an alternative perhaps to BRI investments and as part of U.S. efforts to counter China's presence in the region. What I want to ask you to both to basically hear your take, but also to tell us more on how you think this initiative, this new corridor, I believe it's called IMEC or IMEC, how it can contribute to further integration and cooperation in the region, and that resilience piece that you mentioned in your opening remarks as well.
Sure. So I'm not going to comment on the acronym because we are historically terrible at acronyms in the U.S. government and finding awkward ones to use. But I might disagree with the characterization that this is all about China in some way. Frankly, this is an incredibly ambitious initiative that's designed to build upon the progress that we've seen now over many years to build on necessary regional integration in the region. As I mentioned in my remarks, we're trying to move beyond a purely military approach to the region to be more agile, use diplomacy to lead and build coalitions, and economic engagement is central to that. That is where economic engagement on transnational issues is central to how the region will adapt to the shared challenges of the future, how we will work with the region on those challenges, and I think this corridor provides an incredible opportunity to link countries through trade, help develop, expand trade in clean energy, help these countries transition to a clean energy future, which is obviously something that is going to be necessary as we combat climate change, and help build economic growth, which is also something that as we look in the future is desperately needed in the region in a broad and equitable way. So I would look at this not as a contrast to the activities of any other country, but as really an intention, an ambitious project. It's going to take time. It is, as I mentioned, ambitious in its scale.
Now, let's talk about the reaction of countries in the Middle East to Russian aggression against Ukraine. The region has broadly, I think we can say, that refused to join the West in pressuring Moscow. Yes, they have condemned the Russian attacks against Ukraine, especially they join in some of the UN resolutions, but overall, when you look at especially, for example, in terms of imposing any kind of sanctions, they have broadly refused to join in. The region has, so that has been the reaction from the region. Now, this reaction is not necessarily limited to Middle East. We can say that this has been sort of consistent with other countries in the global south as well. What's the assessment of the administration about this reaction to the Russian aggression from the Middle East? And what has the administration done in particular with U.S. partners to change this behavior and convince Middle Eastern countries to join in pressuring Moscow for its aggression against Ukraine?
Thanks. It's a good question. We certainly have been very active in our conversations with regional partners on this topic. We have seen some support from partners, some more quiet than others, on what they might do, and I won't get into a lot of those details, but we've seen some more public. Certainly, Saudi Arabia has provided over $400 million in support to Ukraine. They invited President Zelensky to the Arab League summit in Riyadh to make his case for more support. We should not be surprised that countries don't want to be in a position where they feel caught in the middle. They're obviously exposed to food insecurity and other things that are directly a result of the war. That's why we've tried to help the region shore up those things so that we can shore up support internationally. We've had some support at the United Nations, as you mentioned, and there's always room to continue to work on that. That's the crux of everything we're doing, whether it's with respect to everything that we're doing with respect to our strategic competition in the region, but importantly in how we're trying to ensure that that Russia faces a strategic loss in Ukraine.
Last week, a Houthi delegation visited Riyadh for the first time since the war broke out in 2014. Now, early reports from last night, when I was checking this morning, indicate that Bahrain's military command has accused Yemenis Houthi rebels of killing 2 Bahraini soldiers in a drone attack on Saudi Arabia's southern border with Yemen. What steps the administration is taking to extend the ceasefire in Yemen? Are we on the path, in your opinion, to reach a negotiated solution to the conflict?
So we see the current moment as a particularly hopeful one when it comes to Yemen. And this administration has been laser focused on Yemen since the very beginning and lasts until just last week. I think Secretary Blinken had at least 3 different meetings on the Yemen conflict while he was at the UN General Assembly, which, if you had any sense of his schedule, is a significant commitment of time. Among others, there was a trilateral meeting between the Saudis, the UAE, and the United States where we continued to voice all of our support for the UN-mediated process. And we continue to push for for a more durable, broader political commitment. There's reason for hope. There's been more movement inside Yemen that was not the case before. We've seen flights now, actually commercial flights from Sana'a. We've also seen very few or no cross-border attacks in recent memory. So we're hopeful that this can move forward. Our special envoy, Tim Lennerking, has been constantly engaged. Sitting next to him, I can tell he's almost never in his office, constantly engaged and on the road. And so we think that there's potential here, and we're hopeful that we with the UN and the other partners can move it forward.
Syria has recently been readmitted, if you want to say that, to the Arab League. It seems that Arab countries in the region, including some of the U.S. closest partners like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and UAE, they all want to normalize their relations with the regime of Bashar al-Assad. However, the United States maintains its opposition to normalization with Syria and has its strong sanctions in place. Does the Biden administration support the re-engagement of the Arab countries in the region with the Syrian regime?
Well, we've made quite clear from the Secretary on down that we do not intend to normalize with the Assad regime, that our sanctions remain in place and will continue to remain in place. In our discussions with those partners that supported Syria's readmission to the Arab League, we've been quite clear that they should get something for their decision to readmit Syria. Get something on the voluntary, dignified refugee or return of refugees. Certainly prioritize humanitarian assistance. It needs to get to those all those Syrians that still desperately need it. And obviously there are other things that the regional partners are interested in, like Captagon trade, which is continuing to fund Hezbollah and the Assad regime. So we've encouraged them. We obviously speak regularly to those partners and continue to encourage them to make sure that they're getting what they said they were going to get when they made this decision.
One of the discussions we'll have later today centers on the delicate balance between advancing interests and upholding values. This balance has long been a challenge and perhaps a source of criticism for the U.S. approach to the Middle East and North Africa. Recently, the Biden administration released most of the aid funds previously withheld from Egypt due to its poor human rights record. What's your reaction to the criticism that says if the United States does not use its leverage to pressure its allies, its friends, its partners in the region to improve human rights, then these countries simply will not change their behavior?
So this is a very important question, and one that we have to constantly contend with working in this region. We strongly support human rights in the region, and we have significant efforts to pursue those. We also have interests that we need to watch after. In the case of Egypt, as you mentioned, a portion of the funds, the foreign military financing that was directed by Congress to Egypt, was approved by the Secretary based on both the role of Egypt as a partner, as a strategic partner, its role in support of Ukraine, and its and also an evaluation of the human rights dialogue that we have ongoing. At the same time, there was some that was withheld that was not that the Secretary did not deem the necessary criteria were met. This is always a balancing act where we need to be forthright and candid with our partners. I think there's many places where we make progress, but I think anybody in any administration would agree that we don't ever accomplish as much as we would like to on the human rights front. It's a continual item on our agenda where we do, our embassies overseas, all of our diplomats work very hard to pursue stronger human rights policies, and it's something that we remain committed to do.
And with that, we're coming to the end of this session. Deputy Assistant Secretary Chris Backemeyer, thank you. Thank you for joining us in person in Ottawa. I appreciate this candid conversation as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Our next session will start right after lunch at 1 p.m., so please make sure that you'll be in the room before 1. It will be the keynote session with the Deputy Foreign Minister of Turkey, and it will start right at 1 o'clock. Thank you.